Dusty Does Death Street. George Harper Adams 2022. Synopsis. A black comedy. Dusty is a former British sergeant major who acquires a funeral business catering to Europeans, Australians and Americans who regularly drop dead from surfeits of beer and sex in the sorriest expat bolthole presently known to man, Phnom Penh. Dusty is joined by American Jimmy, who is on the run from gambling debts owed to mobsters. A surge in corpses causes severe storage problems, but when Jimmy is traced by his creditors and forced to hide money and drugs under and inside coffins in Columbaria, more severe problems arise. Jimmy is also on the radar of beautiful feisty Giulia Fabrizzi at US Homeland Security ICE based in Cambodia. They hit it off far too much. Then a British criminal family wants their loved one exhumed for nefarious purposes, and a Trinidadian gang tries to muscle in on all the money. The situation quickly becomes frantic. Jimmy has to satisfy the feds, the mob, British hooligans and Trinidadian drug lords. With Giulia's help all things are possible. Dusty Does Death Street. Dusty. Death's been good to me. As a regimental sergeant major in Iraq, I saw lots of death, mostly their side because black lives may matter but brown ones don't so much. George Bush knew that, and so now do all the liberals. But leave politics out of it. I'm not here to preach. I'm here to tell you how I, a sort of honest undertaker, got involved first in all the crime and then all the hilarity with dead bodies and hot money. I never knew what was going on until quite near the end. That's the God's honest truth. I shouldn't have taken up with Jimmy, but he has a way of persuading people, an aura you could say. How was I to know he was connected to the mob in New York and Florida and Detroit? In a way though, I didn't care. People who become undertakers are joining a foreign legion. If you can take handling the stiffs, we don't question your background and provenance. More fool us maybe. I couldn't stay with the army after Iraq. Call me old-fashioned, but I like to fight for a cause, not for politicians' vainglory. I'd done my 15 years service and that entitled me to the grand sum of £9,000 a year pension. Thank you so much, Mr. Blair, and all who sail in you. If I could scuttle you personally I would. What's a man going to do with £9,000 a year? Living in England these days is a costly kind of undertaking, no pun intended. At the age of 40 you get so that you don't really want to work all that much anyway. And not in Civvy Street. There's absolutely no respect and no rules in Civvy Street. What was I going to do anyway? Become a bouncer, a security guard, a bodyguard? Leave it out. I've seen those guys, fat wrecks of their former selves, looking angry and eating themselves away inside. No thank you. It's abroad you have to head. Some nice climb where the drinks and fags, if you smoke that is, filthy habit, and girls are cheaper and often a lot better. I'm not going to whinge about British women and who wants to be an army wife anyway. I nearly got hitched a dozen times, but then I paused to look at what British women become after a year or two. You can see the sad men shackled to one of them in every shopping center in England. She putting on 10 a year and him knowing that if he leaves her bang goes the house, the car, the kids and all his savings. There must be a better way. You cast your eyes around the globe, don't you? The Arabs I couldn't bear. They always talk like they're clearing their throat. No thanks. No cheap Arab country except perhaps Yemen, but I don't like being bombed. Then there's Eastern Europe, of course, if you can stand the cold and the bad roads and the potbellies, and that's just the women. No. There's Latin America, but I don't speak Spanish or Portuguese. Somehow the women seem attractive but kind of sinister. No, it's the Asian girls I like. The soft skins, the almond eyes, the slim figures, the youth that stays on them. Quite a few countries there where you can live on 9,000 a year no problem. At a pinch. But not a big pinch. And who knows if there may be a job I could do out there? There's Thailand, full of Germans and Russians. There's Vietnam, far from user-friendly. There's even India, stands for I'll never do it again. There's the Philippines, been there, done that. There's Indonesia and Malaysia. And then there's Cambodia. Nice visa arrangements there. I'll be coming up to retirement one day and then you can stay there forever apparently. Sunny and cheap and somewhere different. Yes. It might do. I took a room in a hotel in Deaf Street, Lyotlay Street or simply Street 172, but I didn't know the street's true character at the time. I didn't feel all that at home there though. The men lounging in the cafes and bars there seemed a bit creepy to be honest. But the hotel was nicely positioned, just round the corner from the palace and an easy walk to the river. Cambodia. Peaceful Cambodia. No hustle and bustle like Bangkok or Saigon. No hard sell like the Philippines. They just let you alone and had their hands out for $20 if you wanted anything. God, they were mercantile if not exactly hustling. Now I'm going to say something not very nice about the country. If you're all woke and PC, skip the next few lines. Wouldn't want to upset you. It's just on my mind when talking to people who don't know how it is out here. There's just this idea going around that big bad white men are coming to Cambodia and similar places and exploiting the women and girls. And nothing could be further from the truth as far as Cambodia is concerned. The shoe's on the other foot. It's they who do all the offering and negotiating and bringing up money. Personally, even as a soldier, I never liked paying for sex. It seems an admission of failure to me. But what the hell? Sometimes you have to do it. I didn't do it often. But in Cambodia seemed that you had two options, just like signing up for a phone, pay as you go or the subscription plan. Complete with free handset. Stupidly I opted for the latter. I don't want to labor you with the details. Needless to say that it had its moments, but in the end it was just plain boring. Not that we got married. It doesn't seem to be quite the fashion in Cambodia. The number of unmarried mothers is staggering and children seem to be a kind of fashion accessory for these women, something you have like a handbag. Then they have to go work in a garment factory or look around for a dumb rich expat daddy to rescue them. Anyway, in the end, although Trey was very sweet, the miscommunication became too great and the boredom too intense. Luckily we didn't have a child. That would probably have hastened my departure. So there I am absolutely penniless and disgruntled and still having bad nights, seeing blown off limbs and blood and gore in my dreams and literally waking up in a sweat. It's the fear and some people call it post-traumatic stress. Yes. I found dead bodies a kind of therapy, can you believe? There's something calming about a corpse, isn't there? It's a body which is never going to hurt you or let you down. They never talk back, the stiffs, and they're always pleased by your company, never complaining, never fretting and never in a hurry. Everyone should have one as a friend. Then I bumped into old Bill Grundy. Good name for an undertaker that is. Reminds you of Grumpy, which rhymes with frumpy, bumpy, lumpy. He was a sad but likable cove and he had been running the Mekong Rest Home as he called it for 20 years. It was little more than a converted 3-story detached house along Russian Federation Boulevard. A dusty ground floor with several narrow booths at the back where the coffins could stand. An office upstairs which smelt of death even more intensely than downstairs and his little flat on the top floor. You know what I mean by the smell of death by the way? That sweet porky sickly odor that all the funeral parlors have. They can never get rid of it. Well, Bill Grundy is looking for a successor, someone who can buy him out from his going concern. Ha! I had one of those Scottish widows' life insurance policies you could cash in and I could make him an offer. He accepted way below what he had first mentioned. He had made a tidy sum, just enough to buy a house and live in God's own little waiting room, UK section, in Eastbourne. There's something reassuring about death. In the Mekong rest home I felt alive, at peace, and all the demons of Iraq were quietened. I had come home. I could spread a little kindness now, which I could never do when I was bossing squad eyes around and preparing them to become armed automatons. Death meant something now. I could follow up on it. Give it some perspective. Crazy, right? But if you've never been in combat, you wouldn't know what I mean. If you haven't seen a man trying to keep his bowels in his body, you wouldn't understand the peace and the dignity of people who had died without agony and how wonderful it was to be next to them. The relief of it all. It really was the sweet hereafter on earth for me. If you think that's morbid, just wait until our little story gets going. Bill Grundy never had to cope with COVID when they were dropping like flies down Death Street for several months. We didn't exactly know where to put the bodies. There are only 3 booths at the Mekong rest home and 1 large fridge out back. A white man is often a large piece of meat, 200 to 300 pounds and more. That's a lot of sausage. Grundy had the biggest fridge freezer going, and I can tell you, nothing defrosts slower than the body. You can't exactly stick it in a microwave either. It's then that we hit on the idea of sawing them up. Stay with me. What else were we going to do? Who looks at the whole body in a coffin anyway? If you put all the bits in, what's the difference? No one's going to check the legs and the midriff. Is it all there? No one's interested. As a last resort, you can blame it all on the coroner, but coroners aren't at all interested in foreign dead men in Cambodia. Unless it's obvious they were murdered. We did have one case of that. Messy. When the Cambodian police are involved, you have to be careful. Or rich. That was before the English family and the Trinidadians arrived looking for their booty. The way I look at it though, it was more funny than nasty. Each to his own taste. For me, anybody that isn't building an IED, improvised explosive device, or shooting a Kalashnikov at you is alright in any shape or form. There I go again, I suppose, bitter old twisted squad die. After I made the purchase of the Grundy place, money was tight. Very tight indeed. I don't like paying by the day at the hotel in Death Street, and quite honestly, the companionship was becoming more than the bore. I hate the wizened, the bloated, the tattooed, the male prematurely old wastes of space which potter around Phnom Penh. The city's made for them, of course. Easy girls and cheap beer and fags. What more could a waste of space desire? They slot right in there and make friends overnight. When you drink, you always have friends. When you're sober and up against it, you find you have none. So I moved into Bali. No 3 resort and apartments. What were the first 2 like? On the Groy Changvar Peninsula. It was relatively empty at the time, and you could get a cheap deal for a 2-room apartment on the 17th floor downwards. There are nice views to be had and lots of peace and quiet. It's also actually got the real Mekong flowing past it to the east. What visitors call the Mekong in Phnom Penh is actually a little grim tributary called the Tonle Sap. The Japanese kindly built a bridge for the sad hopeless Cambodians to finally be able to get to Groy Changvar from Phnom Penh proper. Then the Chinese took over and built the kind of things they like to build. Concrete monoliths with at least 25 stories and a sky lounge in the gym and a swimming pool or 2 to keep their horrible little bodies in trim and never go outside. The Bali No 3 resort is 3 towers of dusty pink inhabited by Chinese get-rich-quicks, black drug peddlers, the odd token white man and his local paid teenage bitch, plus a few skinny gay French guys, all friendly in the lift and lobbies waiting for their little brown boys to turn up. The Bali has a nice lobby and at the gate security guards in what appear to be bulletproof vests. They're Keystone cops in fact, often teenagers too, but they do discourage the local hooligans. The lifts are shiny and brass and marble and play ballade for Adeline in the evening, supermarket music in the daytime. There are about 30 notices pasted on the walls of the lift, mostly in Chinese and Khmer. A reminder that the Chinks have taken over Cambodia and you better learn to live with them or else. They're the landlords and the property developers, and man, are they still building. They won't be happy until Cambodia is a heartless, polluted concrete nightmare like they have at home. I had so little money. The first electric bill really scared me. Cambodia imports nearly all its electricity because fat bastard Hun Sen has been in control for 40 years and isn't exactly motivated to please the people and give them cheap electricity and a decent standard of living. The recent elections were a hoot because I didn't see one poster for an opposition candidate, whereas Hun Sen and his sidekick were plastered all over town. The Cambodian People's Party always wins because no one stands against them. Anyone who might is suddenly dead or in the clink. That's democracy for you. Anyway, a bill of $150 for electric was going to make life hard for me until I got the business going. So I ordered some solar power radios with torches, 2 solar panels, dirt cheap and thin but powerful, and they kept me in light and entertainment at night. The air conditioner I had on only a few hours at night. There were 2 of them for the apartment, big monsters of power guzzlers they were, but fans are a good substitute. I only had one fan and it used 1/20th the juice of an aircon. Then the horrible electric stoves had to be turned off and replaced with a little portable gas stove which ran on butane canisters, all of 37 cents a go. Electric cookers always burned my food. Gas is the thing for sensible cooks. Then the water heater was never turned on. Who needs hot water when the water is always lukewarm anyway? And the washing machine. Another useless item. A soldier washes as he goes in the sink with a bar of rough soap. No barracks dormitory has a laundry basket. Think of the pong. The electricity bill fell and slowly I could begin to see daylight. From my window every morning I see the beautiful early dawn over the Mekong, and I would rig up my solar radio cum flashlight to a small additional solar panel and my power bank to a bigger solar panel, leaving them on the balcony to charge. I was thus never without light and entertainment, and at that time some Khmer women came my way and I was well skilled in seeing through them. They usually want you to pick them up from their home on the first date because no Cambodian it seems knows anything more than 2 kilometers from where they live. Then they can't read maps, no matter how many you send them. Then they just can't find the place, and quite honestly the Bali is hard to miss. You can see the 3 towers from the palace. Then of course they don't have the money for a tuk-tuk taxi. All of $5 perhaps. So you're supposed to order one or foot the bill for one. But nevertheless some girls did turn up and do the business. Afterwards they usually ask for taxi fare. It got to be so boring. Nevertheless old Grundy did move out and I could move into the Mekong rest home, leaving all the windows open to clear the smells, but they never went really. Added to everything was the fact that old Grundy smoked a pipe and you could see the nicotine patina of doom on the walls of his flat. Downstairs we had to be sedate and proper. Purple and green were good colors for the bereaved I found. One noble, the other restful. As soon as I'd taken over the telephone started ringing at odd hours. Relatives from Australia and Britain complained about the state of the body sent to them. Old Grundy seemed to skimp on the formaldehyde always. What right do you have sending my Brian home in that state? One woman in Birmingham shouted down the line at 3 a.m. Brian was a young tattooed ruffian who had overdosed on methamphetamine and heroin. I'm sorry, madam. The business is now under new management. I cannot be held responsible for my predecessor's errors. Of course, I would say exactly the same thing to clients I had personally shipped bodies to. Honestly, what can they expect? In the pink? Blooming? A picture of health? The scumbags we handled often looked so much better dead. They looked oven ready when alive. At this juncture, let me say what I have to say about tattoos. A few years ago, it was revealed that doctors for years had been using some strange acronyms and abbreviations in their clinical notes. DFO, DGT and SI. Patients scratch their heads as they read them in the clipboard at the foot of the bed. What could they mean? DFO meant, drunk fell over. DGT meant, drunk got thumped. SI meant, scumbag index, and was arrived at by multiplying the number of tattoos the patient had by the number of his missing teeth. I quickly took up the practice of SI computation myself and even noted a rough figure down in my notes sometimes. Many of my corpses had indexes in the hundreds. Brian's, I recall, was 208. And so it came to my first body, a retired Irish priest, probably defrocked, called Conor McNeice, who had passed on in a quaint little house along the riverside from general infirmity in the company of his devoted, much younger Cambodian chauffeur, houseboy, gardener, cook and bum chum. The boy. Well, all Cambodian men look like boys until they are 50, when they suddenly become old men. The boy was apparently McNeice's sole heir and next of kin, or so the boy thought. I arrived at the house to find McNeice in the bath under buckets of ice and the boy filling a suitcase with a radio, a toaster, a portable induction stove, cooking utensils, food, clothes, shoes, blankets, ornaments and practically everything else of any value old McNeice had owned, possession ceasing in many people's minds so completely at a person's demise that all his property became gifts to the world at large. I turned a blind eye to such looting and pilfering generally if such crimes were done with decorum and without undue haste. In this particular instance I was mindful that priests were sometimes judged to be respectable, even when residents of Cambodia and living with boys. You can't take anything away, you know, I said and watched the boy's face suddenly assume what we would call a crestfallen expression. Where are his keys? All of them. This place gets locked today. Right now, in fact. The boy got the message. He opened up the suitcase and his little knapsack and showed me the contents. Nothing much of any real worth was inside, and all the clothes looked to be his size. Be off with you then, I said as he handed over 2 sets of keys. He nodded. And call me if you want to get back in. I handed over one of my newly printed company cards. He didn't stay to discover any likely funeral date and did not telephone later to inquire. Just as he was leaving he stood at the door and turned out his empty pockets. Look. No money. No pay. I'm not a money boy. Good for you, lad, I said. He grimaced aggressively and left the room. Jimmy. It ought to have been so beautiful, but we fucked it up. Just when you think you've hit on the perfect fix, someone turns up and reminds you that the world is small and people have long memories. That heat was on me in New York and no mistake. Police heat as per usual, but even worse was the fact that I owed someone who must remain anonymous for the time being a large amount of lettuce, you know, the light green cotton paper stuff people will kill for, insure their wives for, and then have her bumped off for 2 weeks later. That kind of stuff. But I never got to the big house, and that gave me a kind of respect in certain quarters. Jimmy's a stand-up guy. Never pinched, never papered, they would say in their little snug pizzerias and anisette parlors, wherever they congregate these days, which isn't all too many places I can tell you. I could never be made, as there wasn't any single eyebrow dumb ginny wop in me no matter how far back you went. I was a runner, you know, a kind of golfer, go for this, go for that. A bagman sort of. I collected the squeeze all over town and skimmed only lightly most of the time. But so many of them wops were inside now, stung to death by electronic surveillance, that the whole operation wasn't bringing in enough some weeks for me to pay the people who were squeezing me. The ungrateful kids, mom on dialysis, and a young girl I really cared about because she was sweet. Take a hike, Jimmy, ran through my head like a disco tune, beating my brain into submission like a woman pleading for a Gucci handbag. I thought of all the places I could run to and where the mob had the fewest contacts. So I thought, South America was out because they knew everyone down there. I could never stand the Europeans much and I would stick out like a sore thumb there for sure. The only place I really would fit in Europe would be Italy, and that's where the mob could most easily find me because I know no Italian, for one thing. I'm also small, okay. Not a weasel though. I'm built like a steam train, but hell, I'm no Kraut or Swede. I looked across the big pond, the real one I mean, the Pacific. I'd heard of Vietnam, but there were probably too many Americans there still, vets and hangers-on and relatives of the same. It would do as a stopover, but that was it. Thailand and Burma were haunts of mob contacts for obvious reasons, so they were out. Philippines was full of fat Americans nailing underage girls, and someone was bound to spot me. Indonesia and Malaysia were out as nobody seemed to drink there. Too boring in the long run. Singapore too was boring by all accounts. Japan was way too expensive, and Hong Kong had those nasty little gook slit-eyed monsters who could take an order to slice you up and think no more of it than slurping on their chow mein. So I thought of Cambodia. Seemed kinda quiet. I had never heard the word Cambodia on any of the thick Ginny-slavering lips back home before. Maybe the word had too many bits to it, for if I'm not mistaken, the wops ain't so good with long words. Cambodia might be a good place to hide from them. I had dough stashed away in Virgin Island and Turks and Caicos accounts. They would give me $1,000 a month clear for as long as I chose to tap them. The passport was fudgin' expensive. Now I was James the Burton Schindler, not the name I was before, which you don't need to know, and neither does anyone else. Taking a powder though isn't all that easy nowadays. Even when you buy 6 tickets going 6 directions, the CCTV don't lie and they can figure out which one you actually used. I flew to London and kinda liked the place. No gun-toting hoodlums and blacks driving stretch limos and flashing jewelry. No kikes with hats and long sideburns. No stinking gutters and junkie hustlers. But I had to move on. Got to somewhere called Gatwick, then on to another Brit airport, Newcastle I think, and over to Oslo. Then down to Amsterdam, all in one day, and then on to Germany by train. I love the European trains. No smell of gunk and stale farts. Decent eats plus coffee you can savor, not spit out in disgust. I felt safe in Frankfurt and soon I was off to Ho Chi Minh, which I still called Saigon because look here, it's our choice not the chinks and go okays what we call a place, right? The girls serving on the plane were dolls. They gave me the eye, honest. Maybe they're slit the other way. I didn't know. I soon got to know. They are real dolls mainly. Not uppity fucking bitches like most of the American broads these days, all me and wearing the pants and making a man smaller than his already. Ever hear about the man struck by lightning 3 times? Yeah. Some guy in the Midwest got struck by lightning on 3 separate occasions and survived. Think about that. But then the poor guy got married and 6 months later he hanged himself. Nature could never do it. To get real fucked up and suicidal, all you needs is a rank ratchet bitch in your life. Anyways, Dusty and me get to talking. I met him near that street as it happens. He's one of those guys nowadays who thinks head hair is something to be shaved off immediately it raises its ugly follicle. When did that happen? Am I the only guy who uses hair grease these days? I'm proud of my quiff. I don't go as far as the greaseball spick wops though. Don't get me wrong. And undertakers ought to look like regular guys, not like nut-busting punks. Fine chrome dome, I said, or some such. He just looked. I went on. What line of business you in? I said, standing there and blowing my lovely black curls from my clothes down the street. I'm an undertaker, he said. Just like that. Like you would say, I'm a plumber. Steady work, I said, and then I began to lie. I can lie as naturally as breathing, I'm told. I did a stint of that. Back in Jersey. People are living longer though. All alone and mumbling to themselves. It's the young stiffs that get your all washed up and drugged out at 20. There ought to be a law against it. There is, Dusty said. Doesn't stop the fixing and snorting. Meth's the big thing now. Cheap and nasty. It's picking up here too. How did you get into the mortuary trade? Kinda stumbled into it. Helped a guy out. A cousin. I can bear a coffin, if the other guys ain't all that tall. If you gets my drift. And dead people don't scare me. Found my grandma dead when I was little boy. She looked peaceful. Patted and prodded her. Didn't cry or nothing. There's nothing scary about death. People make too much of it. So you learned a little? How long were you in the business? 2 years on and off. I mean, I wasn't all that sure I wanted to do it at first. But well, why not? And it paid well. People you would have thought had nothing certainly opened up their rolls for their mom and pop when it came to putting them 6 feet under. Maybe they wanted to make sure they was dead. Who knows? Dusty laughed. He had a sense of humor anyways, unlike a lot of the Brits. It just so happens we're looking for someone right now. Part-time to begin with. Really? I wouldn't mind a bit of that. This burg is poor, but it ain't cheap. Dusty looked down the street, towards the market, at the food stalls and potholes and durian sellers and the whole murk of Phnom Penh. A very shitty city if the sun don't shine. Actually, I've got a job at the hotel down 172 right now. Death Street, you know. You don't say. Kinda gives me the heebie-jeebies, the whole street does. Full of old men waiting for a thunderbolt or some such. It's our bread and butter. A corpse a week. In the hotels. Sometimes on top of a girl, sometimes just lying there in the street, hugging a bottle. This one died in bed. He's still there. Danish. Sick for some time, they say. Never left his room the past month. You wouldn't believe how many pizza boxes they threw out. Luckily the Danish embassy speaks good English. They got his passport. He was well placed, roll of money under the mattress. That will cover immediate expenses. We're going to cart him off and chill him before rigor gets too bad. Tall guy. Don't want to have to break his limbs to get him in the freezer. Want to come along? And that's how I got into the business. Dusty and me strode up the street and into the lobby of the Central Hotel as natural as anything. They knew who Dusty was and they nodded at the desk. The fire escape was the only option, and Dusty had left his bag in the room. 2 meter long, but the stiff was only 6 feet 2 or some 10. Sickness thins you down no matter how many pizzas you eat and how many single beers you quaff. He had a stack of the latter in the bathroom and under the bed and under the dressing tables. They hadn't done how much good. He was as dead as disco and as light as a feather. Poor guy. I still had sympathy for people then. Soon everyone is just a pile of meat. Disgusting half the time. Where to now? I asked when we had gotten him into the back of the white van. To the hacienda. That was the Mekong Rest Home, a harmless kinda grand but not too grand building, newly painted white and with little plaster doves over the portico and a grim granite stone cross and trying to trip you up in the front yard. It looked impressive with the pillars at the doorway and all. Stained glass in the windows downstairs and thick red carpets inside. It could have been a bishop's townhouse. The mortician area was in the back naturally, behind the locked door and the heavy curtain. You didn't want anyone to hear the implements being used and the chemicals being mixed. Sort of off-putting, as the Brits say. It was just a rather nasty room with a long white marble slab and a lot of glass cabinets behind full of murky-looking tools and jars and cans and packets. Our embalmer, if you could call him that, was off saying, a thin elderly and wizened with a Chinese who you kind of thought liked the work, if you get my drift. Something weird about him, but I guess you have to be in at least the scary little league to do what he does. He's warming up, said Dusty as we lifted the bag onto the slab. "Should we open the bag?" "You only do that once, Jimmy. One whiff and you remember not to do it again. They quickly go off, these guys. But he's thin, thank God. The fat ones whiff to high heaven even before you get them into the bag sometimes." "So what's the drill, boss? Do we just leave him here?" "No. It's Ah Chang's day off. We'll have to get him not the fridge. And pronto. In all the movies I ever saw, there's some kind of sliding contraption they put the stiffs into, all neat and on wheels. No such thing in this dive of a place. It was a long sorted G-layer thing you see in the supermarkets full of ice cream and frozen peas. It was turned way down so it didn't freeze everything, but it did at certain points like the ass and the feet and the shoulders. Ah Chang was always complaining about that in his weird Hong Kong pidgin, but he just had to get on with it." "Problem," said Dusty. "What?" "He won't fit. He's longer than I thought. 6'5" or something. Fuck. And he's as stiff as a board." I thought a minute. "You could always chop off the feet. I mean, who looks at the feet in a coffin?" It was a joke at the time, but believe me, it wasn't a joke a month or two later. We left the guy ass naked with his feet hanging over the edge of the G-layer. Nothing else for it. "Guess he'll be alright until tomorrow," Dusty said, and we were just going upstairs to have a drink in his little flat when the office phone rang 3 times and then was diverted to Dusty's own cell. It was another job. That was the Australian Embassy. They have one of theirs near the big hotel at the end of Kroi Chang Bar. Better get there fast before they find the loot. I can't wait 4 months to be paid. I need a retainer. Here. Take this. And for God's sake put a tie on that shitty shirt you have on. Don't you have a suit of any kind?" Dusty was sliding into a tight, very tight jacket that had been cut for him before he discovered whatever had made him just this side of becoming a porker. He threw me one of the former owner's formal jackets which just about fitted. It still had the sweet rotten luncheon meat smell no dry cleaner could ever quite remove. We jumped into the van and made our way down Russian Federation Boulevard, lined with crappy little stores on one side and huge government buildings on the other. In Manavong Boulevard there was the usual pickup trucks and tiny cheap motorbikes, all called Scoopy, which cost $1,000, and today which cost $500. Our van had an odor too, like kipalata and fruit salad. Sickly it was, in like that vague smell of shit you get at the circus before the animals come on, present but not present. My face was turning greener by the minute. "Here, try some of this," Dusty said and handed me a little bottle of what looked like syrup. "Pak Fa Yao," Chinese embrocation, full of nice things to rub under your nostrils like eucalyptus and menthol and wintergreen. Takes the edge off. He demonstrated how he rubbed a few drops under each nose cavity, and man, it really worked. If you wound down the window and had a little bottle of Pak Fa Yao in your pocket, handling the meat was as easy as pie. Pickup trucks and motor scooters trundled along the street in that strange mix of chaos and order you see in this burg. The motor scooters sometimes carried a family or 4, a junior in front between daddy's knees or standing on the duck board, with another mite being held by mom in the rear. I sometimes saw 3 kids in a row behind dad at school pickup time. Those Hondas certainly took some punishment because Cambodians are fatter than a lot of other Asians. I guess because they stuffed themselves with sugarcane juice and syrupy drinks like that horrible Sting, made in Vietnam like almost everything else and lethal as snake venom. Like 500 calories a sip. Yuck. One day the Hondas were going to collapse all over the city. Giulia. More people are afraid of life than are afraid of death, Jimmy said. We all get tested one way and another as to which we fear most. All the time. One thing to get clear right from the start though. I'm no dyke. Yes, I know there are pretty ones these days like Jodie Foster, but I'm way prettier than her, thank you. I think so anyways. Just because I joined the cops don't mean a thing. Look, it's like this. I grew up in the Bronx thinking cops were almost part of the family. They were in and out of our noisy rat-infested apartment looking for stolen TVs, cameras, phones, rings, bangles, anything of value really, because my father, my lovely father, was a thief, not all the time but enough of the time to be on a search list of NYPD. We got turned over regularly and I even got to know the cops' names. Mom made them coffee and they would bring me candy bars and Jolly Ranchers and they'd josh with me and even let me hold their handcuffs and badges. So you could say that I got to love the cops in a way, but when my titties started bursting out of my trainer bra, the cops got to be a nuisance, ogling and touching my butt all playfully and daddy-like but really being as weird as hell. They've been ogling at me ever since. Christ, they're a real nuisance, aren't they? What is it about men that just can't leave you alone? Men have this thing in their pants that they can't ignore and it must be real irritating being one of them. For God's sake, cut it off or something. Give it an injection. What makes men think that if they just smile at you and pretend to be nice that you don't know what's running through their tiny dirty little minds? Okay, I don't object really. It's kinda flattering. But it's plain boring as hell being hit on all the time. I suppose I should be grateful, but I ain't. So I signed up as soon as I could for the FBI and they looked at me in the prelim interview with a big stack of my dad's priors on the table before them. I could see the folders with Dad's lovely face on the front. When they'd finished staring at my legs in the tight but formal skirt and kitten heels, and staring at my breasts, lashed down but still popping out too much. But what do you expect me to do, have a reduction operation or something? They're just breasts. What is it about some men that they hold a conversation with you staring at your chest? Do they think I had a larynectomy or something? Are they looking for a voice box? I talk through my mouth, guys. Anyway, when they'd finished doing that, they asked me some pretty damn stupid questions, like growing up in a dysfunctional family, had that made me dysfunctional? Now tell me straight. Who doesn't grow up in a dysfunctional family? And what's dysfunctional about being criminal where I lived? For me, it seemed to be a natural reaction to circumstances. What was Giulia Fabrizzi to do with 6 kids to feed, take a correspondence course and become a brain surgeon or an accountant? Go to night school after a 12-hour stretch as a taxi dispatcher in a dingy hole of an office breathing engine fumes all night? I think you would have to define what dysfunctional is, I said, and they liked that. It was well phrased in ball busting, and women police fall into 2 categories in their shrunken little heads: the ball busters and the sweethearts. The ball busters, nearly all dykes, wore pants stretching at the seams and short hair and had no breasts to speak of. They were men with funny voices and no dick. Manageable. Equally manageable are the sweeties, as they called them, diminutive girls they could fantasize about. Rather dim-witted, useless in any crisis, firing their guns at the slightest provocation and best kept out of harm's way in traffic or PR. I was obviously unmanageable, but they could do with the tits and having another woman for their list, and it was assumed that I would sweetie on down and become manageable in the end. It never happened. Through training they were in a quandary what to do with me. So soon after I got the FBI G-Man badge, they sent me abroad, Homeland Security ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That would normally mean a horrible time fighting Mexican narcos, money launderers and sex traffickers based in El Paso. Christ, these guys were real ugly. Fortunately they took pity on me and sent me much further away, to Cambodia. It might have been nice to get posted to Thailand or Burma or even Laos, but no, Cambodia it was, and the kitty gropers and fumblers, all sick fucks and all men, I had to deal with. A woman, a real woman, was what they desperately needed, and like most people, I liked my employers desperate. The desperation of my employers wasn't nothing compared to the desperation of the paydos we had to deal with. Yes, that was our main occupation. The drugs in Cambodia could flow freely, the amphetamine and the cheap heroin and the fentanyl. Rolls-Royces could parade up and down Sihanouk Boulevard dropping off cash from who knows where to who knows what private bank. And the 10 million portrait of Hun Sen and his sidekick could be posted on someone's door or a fence or in a huge standalone placard as big as a tennis court. 40 years in charge and still going in a country without its own currency really or its own anything much except coconuts and coffee. Who am I to comment on all that? My job was to pay DOS and they thought women were more cut out for it really, protecting children and so. But how do you protect children from poverty and an education system in which apparently no one learns to speak more than a few words of English? There I go again. Sermonizing. Value judgments. We're warned against it. Just do the job and shut up. We were based in a block of the American Embassy compound, so they could keep an eye on us, I suppose. It was a nice sort of place really, with American shops and American TV and Americans being nice to the few locals who were allowed in to clean the toilets and mop the floors. It was all strangely 1960s somehow, although I'd only seen that on YouTube. Wham! Win hearts and minds. Keep Asia safe for democracy. But there was little willingness to keep it safe in point of fact. The pedophiles were in cabinets long and thick and disgusting. Somehow all the American perverts found their way out here in one way or another during their slimy careers, and now we couldn't arrest them and ship them back to real prison sentences they couldn't bribe their way out of. If we could catch them, that is, after they were released from the Cambodian cliques. That was part of the problem. The Cambodians thought everything the foreigners did wrong was equally horrible, so why not release them? Perhaps Buddhism had something to do with it too. If you stand a chance of becoming a cockroach in the next life, prison is nothing. Why not be nice to people if they pay you a few $100s? They can't escape karma. But they certainly escaped us. Pervs are devious little cunts, most of them. When you organize a raid, their stash of data sticks goes down the pan in an instant, and who wants to go down there and fish them all out? I wouldn't do it, and the local police would only do so if we were very nice to them. A lot of the pervs were real dumb though, forgetting that nothing is ever really deleted. They all had their little collections, as if memory and actually doing what they did wasn't enough. Some of them had containers of it and they carted it around with them from country to country. I kid you not. Notes and sketches for kids, little self-pen fantasy novelettes, hundreds and hundreds of grainy photos taken from windows, up alleys, in playgrounds and half-lit bedrooms, and the underwear and the baby clothes and the kinky lingerie kiddie size. These guys were gross. Sometimes though something else appeared on my desk, a very nice desk with a picture of Mom and Dad on their wedding day, a fresh garland from the ragamuffin kids dodging the traffic on Manavong Boulevard, an old-fashioned roll of something with visiting cards, and 2 phones which hardly ever rang. There were also in-and-out trays and my boss, Lieutenant McGeorge, who looked askance at anything still sitting in the in-tray at 5 p.m., even if it was a memo about compound parking facilities. I never had a car anyway. I had a mountain bike. How the hell was I supposed to stay fit at 33 degrees centigrade? Jog and drop dead? Come off it. Anyway, something did appear on my desk sometimes, something which wasn't another ugly American, Australian or British pedophile. I yearned for a real crook to turn up so I could stake him out, surveil him, seduce him maybe, who knows? Crooks turned me on somehow, not the dumb sort mind you. I liked the little adventurer, the loser too maybe, the nice guy trying to make a living with his left hand, just like my old dad. Yes, I was reliving my childhood like everyone else does. There was a sad loser dad out there for me somewhere to save and love. It was my secret. Eventually, of course, he turned up, all 5 feet 6 of him, all broad-cut beef of him, all twinkling vulnerable eyes of him. I was outside the airport and I'd put on my visiting backpacker outfit because I was awaiting the arrival of some runner from the New Jersey mob called Sammy Pirandello, a nice name, literary and all that, but what turned up was another shiny suited wop with about as much finesse as a nightclub bouncer. This guy couldn't be for real. He had mob written all over him, not the upper echelons either, more a soldier, a runner, and he wouldn't be made in a month of Sundays. They think they're really something, these guys. He was a loser, but I didn't find him attractive. He was too much of a loser and carried the bulk around the midriff no guy his age ought to. He was wheeling the heavy big suitcase the inexperienced traveler always has, plastic shell, and had another interesting sort of case with him too, much smaller, which he clutched to him like he didn't want it to get away, and how it might have been chained to him for the way he held it. Now you didn't need to be an FBI officer to know what he was doing. They never check much at the customs in Cambodia, so he probably hadn't had to open it. For dimwits, Sammy, as I later found out he was, for dimwits he looked like a visiting American businessman, which he was in a manner of speaking. He came through the little swish-opening electric doors and onto the dim concrete of the arrivals area and just stood there looking around. I was sat there in the one of the rather cute dolphin shape or something hard plaster benches, wondering why every convenience store at every airport charged you $2 for a can of Diet Coke. This store wasn't even technically inside the mysterious alternative economic universe known as Beyond Check-In. Whatever. Eventually Sammy was rescued. A very nice-looking guy, middle-sized for me, but I guess he could be considered small by men, broad and strong in the upper body without being a walking gorilla, came up to Sammy, and instantly I saw that they would never hit it off together. A mismatch if ever there was one. The smile of the other guy told you everything. It was what you could call a shit-eating smile, sardonic and forced. Jimmy, that was the guy's name, I later discovered, knew Sammy was an embarrassing jerk as much as I knew it. That gave us a kind of solidarity from the very beginning. Sammy. You know something? It's a fucking small world. And I tell you something else. God is having us all on. I swear it's legit what I'm saying. Listen. This here ignorant Bronx bull Jimmy is telling you something. God ain't all about love and understanding. Good ain't about fire and brimstone either. I'm pretty sure that Hitler and Al Capone are probably having their balls roasted for all eternity somehow, but how do you torture someone forever, and what does pain mean when you're officially dead? Go figure. What I mean is this. God is having a laugh. Just think of all the ludicrous situations you find yourself in, bare-ass naked in the street, in a broad's house when the hubby comes home, without a cent in your pocket and the rent is due, but then the landlord drops dead the next day. Believe me, God is one big comedian. If you don't believe me, it's your lookout. Let me tell you a story. So I got this neon-colored mountain bike, right? Thought it looked good, and I ain't gonna sit in a gym pumping iron like some jerk-off. I'd rather keep fit by actually going somewhere. Seems to me that if you're in a gym running on the spot, you're one big loser. If you're running, after a certain period of time, you ought to be somewhere else. Get my drift? So there I am going round the corner at the old market, minding my own business and trying not to get run over by the pickup trucks and tuk-tuks and manic women on their scooters. Yes, I said it. Women are the worst. They always sneak up behind you and undertake your... Funny thing, I guess. Undertaken rather than overtaken an undertaker. I'm turning into the bit of the lane where the cops stop car drivers. They can squeeze and they stand there in the sun looking a bit meaner than they usually look and hot and bothered and on the make. Who do I see coming out of the little corner shop where I first discovered Anchor mineral water? No other than that little cunt of a wise guy, greaseball pimp fuck Sammy Pirandello. More importantly, he sees me. And it's useless to try and run away, if you can run away on a bicycle stuck in traffic, that is. You just can't. And if you runs away, there's no doubt the guy who spotted you Even one as inbred and dumb as Sammy Pirandello will know something is up and he'll ask back home and find out what's up in no time and you're dead. Real dead. So I play all nonchalant and cool and hope it's gonna be alright. But God's a comedian, and it might be alright in the end, but not for the moment. "Hi Jimmy. Long time no see," he says, guzzling a beer, sweating in one of those lightweight silk suits the dumber Ginnies wear even when it's hot, because without the clothes, what are they? Just Dungeonies, but even more so. Let me tell you something about middle-aged, fat olive oil sweating Sammy Pirandello. Apart from being a degenerate gambler and pimp, Sammy was well in with the boys because he had an uncanny ability to dodge bullets and dodge trouble of any kind. It was like the Godhead on high had decided to take pity on the idiots, the poor in spirit or some such. I remember all that from my Sunday school. We had a couple of retards in class with us and the priest explained what poor in spirit meant because he was a nice kind of guy. He only felt you up if you had an inkling you sorta liked it, and there were pansies and queers even at our age who just love it, believe me. Anyways, maybe it was because he was so slow and dumb that Sammy survived all those years, because 20 years in the racket was a lifetime. Maybe he was 2 or 3 sentences behind everyone else, so he got to thinking and not making mistakes. Like Gary Cooper, who said that he gave the impression of being a good actor, all moody and brooding, but all he was trying to do was remember his lines. "I'm kind of passing through," I said, feeling my bowels releasing but fortunately not pooping in my pants. "That's great. Where can a fellow get a decent hamburger around here? I'm tired of all this good food. It just ain't filling." So naturally I put him into a tuk-tuk and I went ahead to Death Street and we found the place where my first bike had been stolen, the little cafe where deadbeat expats hung out all day over endless beers and meager portions, for them, of fries with so-so hamburgers, Burns pizza and microwave Aussie meat pies. Sammy is one of those guys who looks even bigger when they sit down because his gut spills over everywhere, his belt buckle, his lap and up his chest a bit, although he ain't all that fat in fact. Not by modern Ginny standards. Sitting opposite him, after shackling my bike, I was running through all the possible stories I could tell him, plus what the fuck was he doing in Cambodia anyway? "Just passing through?" Sammy said. "Yay. I live in Saigon now. Good dames, good drinks and warm. Suits me." "Yay, but for me it's just a bit too warm. Know what I'm saying?" "Well, you have to kinda dress down a bit, Sammy. Shorts and sandals sort of. I can tell you haven't been here long. And I have no fucking intention of staying. As soon as the work's done, I'm off out of here." It was then that I noticed that Sammy was carrying something that looked terribly familiar. The kind of little attaché case with the brass combination lock any idiot could open in 10 seconds, but the wops always gave you one because they thought it was more secure, and legally speaking, if the cops prized it open or opened it without your say-so, they were breaking and entering. Some lawyer must have sold them that line for $1,000 a long time ago. I knew pretty much what was in the case all right. I knew they were desperate to hide money these days, but what the fuck? Cambodia? And I can kinda guess what the work is, Sammy. I'm a trooper, remember? I looked at the case. "Yay, well, dumb idea if you ask me. These banks don't look legit. They don't even look crooked. They just look wrong." Just then, who turns up but a guy I passed a company car to a while back. He's the creepiest looking Pole or Frenchie, I forget which. He drops it on the table. "Your Mekong rest home is damned expensive, young man," he says in some kind of Francophone Eastern European accent I can't make out. "We aim to please, but nothing's cheap these days," I say. $3,000, and that's just the dry ice treatment, never mind embalming. You'll never know the difference when you're dead, old man. All I can say is that we're worth it. If you want the full treatment when you pass away, a lot of people just don't care. I don't care to be robbed, alive or dead. And he shuffled away. Sammy made for the card, and it would have been stupid to stop him. He picked it up and I could see even his addled brain working up to some 10. What the fuck? In the stiff business. The morgue. What do you know? He let out a laugh, which I didn't know he had in him, a big raucous one. Wait till I tell the boys back home. Jimmy pushing stiffs around. They'll have one big laugh about that for sure. Well, I used to. Before I went to Saigon. Couldn't take the smell for one thing. Yay, he said. He looked up at me like the wops do sometimes when they know they're being conned. In the old country they would get a gun or a nice pick-out at that point. But Sammy was pretty docile. I never heard that he had killed a guy. He went on. Tell it to the Marines. I knew I hadn't seen you for quite some time. Then I heard you had skipped the country. Some beef with the bookies. Or the Shylocks. I forget. But they're looking for you, Jimmy. You don't skip out on the mob. They're angry, and when they get angry, they get all sorts of ideas. If I say nothing, then it gets to be my problem. Know what I'm saying? The best thing you can do is to apologize and offer them something, anything. They don't like to waste guys these days, but if they have to, they will. I thought that was pretty smart coming from him, and pretty straight too. I was thinking fast and clear. If I skipped Phnom Penh, then Dusty was for it, because they would never believe he didn't know where I was. They'd beat him black and blue. Dusty could take a lot. He couldn't take what they would do though, and it was pretty mean to do that to him. Then there was the fact that if you skipped again, you were definitely dead meat. They'd find you and they'd pop you. Look, tell 'em I'll do anything. Just give me time. I wasn't skipping out on anyone. I just didn't know what to do to make any dough. And out here right now there's lots to be made one way or the other. If I can put some of that the guy's way, just tell them to tell me what to do. That's all. Be a mensch, can't you? I'll do my best, Jimmy. But you better give me all your contact info just to show you're on the up and up. And you'd better answer the phone when they call. Make damn sure of that. Sammy was like a lot of them. A reptile. He warmed up when the heat was on. I had to admire him. I'd underestimated him. He had sized up the situation pretty good. It was the only way forward. Plus the fact that if you don't run, they can't chase you. Okay, Sammy. It's a square deal. Lots of things I can do out here. I can even take over your job. Unless you like the traveling? Fudgy dabba-budded. I don't think they'll trust you with money unless I'm here with it. But who knows? Actually, they don't like the banks so much these days. Even the crooked ones here. They're all wired. Know what I mean? The feds can tap into them anytime they like. It's all electronic. Traceable. The guys don't like that. They like invest. They like hide. They don't like banks anymore. And if you think of things along those lines, you're going to be talking turkey with the guys. Smart kid, Sammy. Some of the time. The next week I gets the call. It's who I think it is, and he don't sound the least bit angry. He's as smooth as a good hooker's ass. Look, Jimmy, we got something big in mind, medium big anyways. We have a lot of lettuce to stash somewhere. You gotta find the somewhere. If you go near a bank, we'll skin you alive. When Sammy brings you a load, just hide it. Every week. Every couple of weeks. Whenever. He's be flying in from Bangkok, from all over. Whenever he brings a bag, stash it fast and stash it good. You're listening to me? We don't want any fuck-ups on this. The gang is moving out to New York, out of Florida, out of all the usual places. The cops are on us like a cheap suit. All the time. We ain't asset stripping, We're having a fire sale sort of. You gotta help us out. Help us on this one and you're an honorary made man. I promise. Be a good guy. Hide it so no one can ever find it, all except you and me. A made guy. Funny. He wasn't even one of them himself, yet. I was shitting my pants quietly the other end of the line. I knew what happened on deals like that. If you told them where it all was, you were dead meat. If you didn't tell them they'd beat it out of you, then waste your. Either way, each bag was a small execution warrant. Unless I thought of a way to get myself in the clear on this one, I could kiss goodbye to a long life in the sunshine. I needed to think up an angle, a way out. Up to then, I had to just play along. Sure. I'll do it. I ain't got no choice anyways. I'm tired of running. And if there's some time in it for me. Sure there is, Jimmy. Your life for one thing. I swear on my mother's grave when this deal is over you get a handshake worth big time and you're in the clear. I knew that when a wise guy makes a promise like that, you're really fried. But I said nothing. I was thinking about today and tomorrow. As long as the deal lasted, I was going to be okay. That was enough for the time being. Sammy showed up with the first suitcase 5 days later, flying in from Rangoon or whatever they called it these days. Of course they were fooling me. There wasn't just money in the case. There was a false bottom and a kilo of powder. Dunno why Sammy looked so confident. Turns out he wasn't the mule. The suitcase and the money came with him. The powder came from somewhere else. Look, Sammy, we have to find a way of handing this stuff over better, I said as I sat in the tuk-tuk with him leaving the airport. The cops ain't dumb anywhere. And the feds must be watching you in one way or another. You're so fucking obvious. Pardon me for saying so, but a silver silk suit and shades in the suitcase ain't exactly undercover. Can't you tone yourself down a bit, you dumb ginny prick? I was losing it with him fast. And we hadn't really started. He just sat there looking surprised that I could turn the tables on him, be as mean as he liked to be. Then he said, "Where do you suggest, Tonto?" "I'll give you a place. A very safe place. Just get yourself to your hotel and keep the fucking suitcase to yourself until tonight. I'll show you where to drop future consignments. And when you're ready to make a delivery, you send me a message like, 'Betty sends her love.' But those exact words. Then I know you're on your way. Betty misses you. That means you stashed it. Can you remember that, you fuckface? The feds are on us now. I can feel it. Up there in the sky. They're following you and they're tying you all in with me. I'm gonna get out of this fucking truck right now because you and your shades and your expensive Ginny cologne are pissing me off. You just wait until tonight. Where are you staying?" Midnight. There are lots of graves and graveyards in Phnom Penh, but they ain't very Christian. If you want to be buried in a coffin rather than an urn, it gets complicated, but it can be done. Anyways, it's not difficult to find a graveyard because every Buddhist temple has one, and one thing Cambodia ain't short of is temples. Even in Phnom Penh, which is a kind of business hub, there are temples everywhere with golden arches and high walls and statues and all the trimmings, like a lovely smoky temple inside and a big Buddha and more gold paint than Liberace's bathroom. The ashes of big wigs in Phnom Penh get buried in graves with a kind of gold cone on top. Very ornate, but anything's only as ornate a memorial as people keep it up for you. Sad to say, relatives out here are just as sloppy as the folk back home. Once the spoils have been divided at the big post-death carve-up, I suspect that the Khmers just go their separate ways. Oh yes, they get together for a shindig every now and again, and they have this canvas marquee over the entrance to the building so that all the relatives can grieve and get plastered and bang a gong. You see it in Vietnam too, and who are we to criticize people for wanting to make sure someone is really dead? That's the best reason to attend any funeral, and it, in most cases. Anyways, I picked up Sammy way later than I'd intended, and it was pushing midnight when we both got into the tuk-tuk. Sammy had indeed dressed down and had bought himself a shitty copy of a t-shirt with the letters all wrong, so it read AIDS or some such on the front. His shorts were too tight and he looked for all the world like a dumb fruit out for a stroll and a glory hole pickup rendezvous. "Lovely outfit, Sammy," I said. "The cocksuckers will all be swooning for you. Keep your back against the wall though." "What a fucking dork." "Best I could do. They don't have my sizes out here." "They don't have your sizes anywhere. That's why all you fat fucks get the tailored suits. Fat Ginny Wop size ain't anything, though fashion houses are cutting up their material for any time soon." I thought it best if we got out of the tuk-tuk some ways off from the temple cemetery. I'd chosen somewhere pretty close to where Sammy was staying because I didn't want to confuse the jerk more than I had to. "Look, Sammy, we made 2 turnings. 3 blocks. Now we're walking straight a whole 100 yards. Here's the address of the place in Khmer and English. Lose it and I'll skin you alive." He mumbled something all quiet and contrite. I'd cut him down to size for sure. Sammy was nothing without his suit, believe me. Take the silk and the sheen of these mob guys and they all look pretty inferior. I get it. Now what do we do? The road was wide, dusty and unlit, lined by buildings with high brick walls, barbed wire on top of them and wrought iron gates they couldn't put a tank through. The traffic was thin and the sky was overcast with just a glimmer of a half-moon. The air was hot but not all that humid anymore. The nice thing about Phnom Penh is that they're pretty tight-fisted with the street lighting. Even the feds wouldn't see you if they were on the other side of the street, which they might well be, knowing you. Take a look. Sammy took a look. It's a joke, mutton head. Now look, can you remember this place? Fix it in your fat head. It's easy to remember. Look at the big ornamental horses outside. Look at the archway. And look at the open gate. I'd chosen pretty well. A lot of the temples were guarded like Fort Knox, but this one probably hadn't recovered since Pol Pot's men had raided it, smashed it and killed all the monks. Maybe it was why they didn't guard it no more. The temple inside had had the Buddha removed and the decorations burned, bashed and scattered. The graves too had had the hammer taken to them at one time, which was a pity as you could see they'd been pretty when they'd been built. Now many of them were just heaps of shards waiting for some kind soul to restore them, but no one had come by for over 40 years. The shards of the graves were wonderful news to me because you could hide a case in them and no one would ever know it. I found one with a lot of twists and turns in the stones you could easily navigate into with your arms and hands, and there was even a light drop in the ground when you were done. Perfect. I turned on my little solar torch, a kind of keyring really. I'd even given Sammy one. He wouldn't have come out with a torch or a light of any kind otherwise. An amateur. Yes. It's here. I've put a stick up on top to guide you. You can't miss it. 10 steps forward, turn left, the second row, then another 10 steps, then turn to your left. See the stick? Think you can remember that? I can sort of. You'd better. I don't want to be wandering around here in the dark looking for the case, Sammy. And what do you text me when the case is delivered? Betty says hello. No, you dumb prick. Betty sends her love means you're on your way to make the drop. You can be in the plane or at the airport. It don't matter. I don't want to know. Betty misses you means you made the drop. And you better check to see if anyone's following you. Both ways. I mean really check. Take a tuk-tuk one place and take another or even another. Don't you fuck up on this. Ever. You listening to me, Sammy? It's my ass on the line now. I don't want to go away and toss the salad for nobody. I made him go out of the graveyard and come in again twice. just to make sure. He found a place to hide the cases pretty well for an educated chimp. As I say, maybe he wasn't as dumb as he pretended to be. Maybe he was just pretending all the time. Just maybe. Giulia. When you're telling guys, you quickly get to like them or hate them. I quickly got to hate Sammy, but Jimmy I kinda warmed to. For one thing, Sammy was too easy to follow. He always looked furtive. You could spot him in any crowd, jerking his head about and looking behind him. Jimmy was the exact opposite. He never made a move without an object to it, and he never once jerked his head or swiveled his eyes. He was courteous and kind. He smiled at certain people like old ladies and kids. He tipped tuk-tuk drivers and waiters. He stroked dogs and clicked his tongue at them. He was a really nice guy. On the other hand, Sammy was one kind of selfish, brash idiot, demanding instant service wherever he went, squabbling with tuk-tuk drivers, never at ease, never generous, never polite. And as an operative of the mob, he was a disaster. He stayed in the swanky hotels, he always had lots of luggage, he drank all day something or other, and he was always dressed like a dork even when he lost the shiny suit and even shinier Gucci shoes. Anyways, Jimmy and him jumped into a tuk-tuk some way off of the airport, which caused Sammy some kinda consternation. Of course there were real taxis right outside the airport, but Jimmy I could see was a much smoother operative than his colleague or acquaintance or whoever he was. Turned out Jimmy had gotten a retirement visa of all things, which were supposed to be issued to those over 50 only, but he was in his early 40s. A nice illegal visa then, which we could get impinged on any time we chose, but we didn't want to. We had been tipped off that the mob, or whatever they were these days, some of them had been infiltrated by narcos from Mexico and Colombia, was moving cash all over Cambodia because the country had lots of private banks and very understanding police with open pockets. I reckon you could only get $1 million in cash in a briefcase, but it turned out they were bringing in treasury bonds for much more and lodging them in vaults and escrow accounts in Phnom Penh mainly, and moving in on the casinos on the coast in SYNOPSIS in a big way. It looked like a new Las Vegas down there, if that is you could dislodge the Chinese gangs. But the mob had new coked-up shooters from Latin America now, and the Chinese couldn't hold out for long. When it comes to being vicious, you can't beat a coked-up Mex or Colombo. Sammy never went to SYNOPSIS though. He never went anywhere much. He'd go down for late breakfast, which was always too much fat on his plate and too much sugar and cream in his coffee. Yes, he asked for cream. Fruit and vegetables were something he saw but never consumed. I wondered why we were following him. There wasn't anything to find out. He came with the briefcase and he delivered it somewhere. Did it really matter where it was delivered? The money was bound to show up in some account or other. It would be interesting to know the bank, they said in Washington. So we had to trail him. But he left the case in the hotel strongroom and never seemed to take it with him. Now look, I'm not on 24/7. A girl has other things to do even in boring Phnom Penh. Yes, it's real boring here. There's nothing much going on that isn't paid for and grimy, featuring men and hookers. There was a nice French jazz bar, but it was too smoky and too French. French men think any woman alone is meat waiting to be skewered with their much-vaunted charm and sophistication. Leave it out, fellas. The real mystery was, where did the loot go? We were supposed to have help and surveillance from two sources, the local pedo police and the organization known as Action Pour Less on Funds, APLE. The name of the latter gives it away. It's a bleeding heart kind of place full of worried French people, and they were attracted by the name of the organization and the idea they were going to do some good. Actually, police should chase pedos, not social workers. Mostly the APLE stayed away from investigations, but lately they had vowed to be proactive and chain up the pedos once and for all. So we had two stringers called Marcel and Delphine, who I was pretty sure had something going called an extramarital affair. It was a policy of the PLE that they only employed married people, as if that was a protection against anything. Anyway, Marcel was a gawky Lyonnaise teacher searching for himself, and Delphine was an irritatingly attractive slim woman who had given up trying to get pregnant because she discovered her Belgian husband was as queer as a $3 bill. Marcel was no doubt doing his best to compensate. God, how they loved being sent on assignments, and God, how useless they were. They always stared, they always stuck out, they always lost their man. I used them sparingly. In Sammy's case, I would wait until dusk, then hand them over to the Love Duvet couple. They liked being in a car together and doing something useful between hot steamy fumbling in the back seats. They didn't mind staying up all night even. One would stay awake in the driver's seat and the other catnapped an hour or so and back. It built the relationship. I was bringing them closer together. Maybe they would eventually make me best woman at the wedding. Sammy, after shopping for his bottle of booze and visiting his favorite massage parlor, the one which no doubt manipulated his floppy extra bone for a price, would sit by the pool listening to music on his Bose Bluetooth earphones, reading some crime or celebrity trash and ogling at any woman who hoved into his Ray-Bans. His swimming trunks were Speedos, of course, and showed his butt hair in the best possible light. What is about men which makes them think that something designed for Olympic competition will make them look sexy and interesting? I sat in the coffee shop opposite the pool, listening to an audiobook and looking like an American tourist, I hoped. Then, when my ass got to be feeling numb, I went to the convenience store place opposite the hotel where teenagers enjoyed their free Wi-Fi and peered at their cheap laptops. Some of them were actually very nice to talk to, but in Cambodia they seemed to be learning more Korean and Chinese than English. Come 5 o'clock and I was already calling up the APLE and wondering when the lovers would show and relieve me from the intense boredom of sharing Sammy Pirandello's life. They would turn up as early as 6, and boy was I pleased to go. Fortunately Sammy only ever stayed a day or two, and then he was gone. The report I got the first time was that Sammy left the hotel just before midnight in the company of a shortish, strongish kind of guy. He was carrying the case with him. A tuk-tuk brought them both to an abandoned monastery not all that far from the hotel. Then some strange shenanigans ensued. Both men went into the compound with the case. Then they came out without it. Then Sammy went in on his own and came out again after a while. Sammy was jumpy as ever, whilst his friend was as cool as a cucumber throughout. Marcel and Delphine also said they could see that Sammy and his friend weren't on exactly good terms. Well done, honeys. Marcel and Delphine could spot that from over the street in a darkened car. Most other people could actually spot it from the moon. Sammy mercifully left the next morning. The other guy was the man who interested me now. I staked out the monastery precinct from 9 the next morning, as no self-respecting crook ever got up before then in my experience. Some of them went to bed at that time. But I had the idea that my man wouldn't be shy to appear in the daylight. He looked like he knew what he was doing all the time. I didn't bother going into the ruined graveyard or the temple to poke around. They had stashed the case somewhere, and I suppose I could have rigged up a camera with a solar panel even to give me live streaming coverage. I could have sent a drone into the air too, but what the hell. There's something I had learned about crooks operating in a foreign country. They all believed they were invisible somehow. They were surrounded by meaningless strangers they couldn't communicate with, so slowly they got the idea that they themselves weren't really visible. My man wasn't as bad as that, but he was surely colored by the same kind of assumptions. He turned up, of course, around 11 o'clock, cool as anything, sure of everything, and just walked into the precinct. He was on a mountain bike, a 26-incher, all neon frame and cute looking. He'd be easy to spot, but hadn't they told me at school that the easiest way to look legit was to be conspicuous? He emerged after a while with the suitcase under his arm, which was a neat trick. Carrying a case looks bad. Under the arm, and it could be anything. You could even put a jacket or coat over it and it would almost disappear. He didn't do that. The invisibility illusion kicked in even for him a little. He wasn't jumpy at all. But he did look around, just a quick look, but I could see his gaze was for real. And it was attractive even then, I have to admit. He strapped the case to the back fender of his bike and rode off. Now following a bike is difficult in Phnom Penh if you're in a car. Bikes and motorbikes can move much faster. Fortunately I had my own bike on the roof of my car, an even bigger mountain bike with 11 gears not 7. It really moved. His neon-framed 26-inch wheels were no match for me. He had the irritating habit of riding through red lights though. He never looked round once. If he had looked round, all he would see would be a cute kind of tourist girl in dark glasses, leggings and a tightly bound gym bra top. Well, why not? It seems to be what every American dork bitch was wearing that year, and if you're on a bike, you have to look sassy, surely? Where was he leading me? He turned off Manavong into Russian Federation Boulevard, the street with all the important government places, including Army headquarters, on it. On the other side, though, it was just ordinary Phnom Penh, but man, it was a long dusty road, the main road to the airport, and choked with traffic half the time. After 3 or 4 kilometers he stopped. I couldn't believe it. What was he doing stopping at a funeral home? There it was, the little 3-story house which had been turned into something pretentious with pillars and doves and white marble, this and that, even the colored windows you see in chapels. Christ! What was going on? I'd been no godfather of course and knew that funeral parlors, pizzerias and olive oil wholesalers were the natural greaseball fronts, but hadn't time moved on? He must be having me on. But he wasn't. He stayed in the building for 2-3 hours before he emerged with another guy, a bald-headed one I immediately recognized but couldn't quite place. Then it came to me as I tailed them as best as I could in their white van down Manavong again, going north this time and nicely held up in the post-lunchtime traffic. I'd seen the guy at a funeral of someone in the embassy. It had been quite a nice ceremony and of course it clicked with me now. He had been the undertaker. But how had my man managed to get involved with the stiff business? And why? He didn't look the type. He looked too cheerful, too full of, dare I say it, life. Anyway, I lost them just by that crappy French building made to look like a cascade and housing all the brand names La Belle France could muster. I'd never been in it. On my salary? Are you kidding? I clung to my little Prada Galleria handbag, 5 years old this fall and still going strong. I was there next morning though. He turned up on his bike just after 10 and he looked quite well rested. I hate guys who look like they've been up all night. I was pretty sure he didn't smoke either. He looked after himself. Different from most of the slobs I tailed. He parked his bike and locked it to a drain pipe round the side. I'd been looking into the Mekong Rest Home's business credentials and saw they even had a website advertising their services. What a crazy set of guys, expats handling the dead in this god-forsaken country. Well, I suppose you had to make a living somehow. But what was my man doing working for such a business and meeting mobsters and stashing cash? I let my imagination work, and of course it hit me. It was so obvious. What better way of hiding cash for a while than recycling it through a funeral operation? Funeral directors got about a lot and they shipped overseas too. But if the funeral business was just front, who was this English ex-military guy fronting for the mob? Was he in on it really? And if they wanted to deposit the money in banks, why didn't Sammy just go direct? And there were many other better businesses to launder money than a funeral business. Sammy or my man could go around buying up businesses, real estate, land. Cambodia was on the up and up sort of. But was the mob that desperate? Thousands of places to invest besides Cambodia surely. No, I thought the wops were being inventive at last. There had been too many scores recently of dough traced electronically all over the world. It all went through the SWIFT system ultimately. Put a tap or a filter on that and you could catch a lot of funny money. The Bureau had a lot of taps and filters in place. Turned out the mob wasn't using banks anymore, just like they weren't using their phones. Money was turning up in the oddest kinds of places, the places where you used to find bodies. In flyovers, under floors, under electricity pylons. The wise guys were getting wise, or were they getting desperate? I think using people like Sammy meant they were desperate, but maybe they had no choice. The mob was crumbling and people like Sammy were the best they could find. I was wondering when my man would leave the building when he obliged by cycling off towards Pasteur, but not quite getting there. He was staying at the Grand Central Hotel, it seemed. Not that it was very grand or all that central, but it was okay, $35 a night, but my man was probably using the monthly deal, which they now didn't offer to new customers. It was just before COVID hit and the economy was doing just fine. I watched the lift lights just after he went upstairs. My man lived on the 12th floor, not quite at the top but pretty near. I was half thinking I might get a room and install a cam or two, but I still didn't know my man all too well. Perhaps he had made me already. I'm pretty obvious even playing the dork student backpacker. One thing you learn at the Bureau and in practice is to make haste slowly, as they say in the book. You never know what will turn up. Install a cam in the hall, why do that? Why not just hang around and see what happens? Play it by ear. I was wondering why my man came home for lunch and what had happened to the briefcase. He must have somewhere secure in the rest home already. Very secure. I wouldn't like to be in his shoes if the mob suddenly lost $1 million or $2 million. They tend not to be all that forgiving. The rest home must have a safe, but what if the British owner wasn't in on the deal and didn't like strange cases of dough stored there? Where else could he deposit it? Old buildings like the Mekong Rest Home had lots of hiding places, I guessed, cisterns, cellars, under loose floorboards. Whatever. More intriguing was why he came home at all. He didn't look like the sort of cheapskate who made and ate his own sandwiches in his room. Too miserable for him. He looked like he enjoyed life more than that. I guess he just came home to spruce up. For a date maybe? Yes. Everyone had a kind of sex life, even me if I would let it out. If I could find a guy who wasn't a jerk, a groper, a married man that is. Eventually he came down and walked past me in the lobby. He looked, but it wasn't that kind of wolf look they mostly have. It was almost respectful, courteous. He walked to the front desk first, something about his laundry. And he wanted the room done. They were a bit slack at the Grand Central, I saw. They were nice to him though. He was also nice to them. Then it happened. He turned and spoke. "Staying here?" he asked, and I could instantly hear he was from Jersey way. Kind of weighing it up. "Is it recommended?" "It's clean and quiet and comfortable. No bedbugs." He smiled and I could see it was good smile. All teeth and white teeth at that. "That's good. I kinda got tired of them in Bangkok." "Passing through, are you? Well, Cambodia is nice if you like a quiet life. Not much going on here. Except a spot of money laundering," I thought, but I didn't say. My mind was working in shit hit the fan mode. I shouldn't have been spotted. I shouldn't have entered the hotel even. And if I had entered, I shouldn't have stayed. But you have to deal with whatever situation arises and make the best of it. Fed Training Manual page 267A. Or some such. I remember the sentence if not the page number. "Might spot you at breakfast," he said, and he was gone. I should have let him go, but I didn't. I tailed him loosely up Pre-Trasac Street, loosely meaning I had no idea if he was there or not, but I had seen him turn right into Pre-Trasac, and maybe he was heading somewhere I could watch him further. I wasn't disappointed. He had stopped halfway up the street. I could see his bicycle parked at a little Thai restaurant. I dove into the coffee house opposite, which had nice tinted windows. It was dark inside and you were practically invisible from the outside. Jimmy was talking to a weird kinda looking old gent, a very old gent indeed, all bald and wrinkled and gray, sagging but with a strange kind of dignity to him. Was this a retired wise guy? I doubted it. They retired to Florida nearly always with a stash of loot and a yacht and a teen goddess trophy wife. They never went to places like Cambodia. Why should they? My man ate well with chopsticks, which endeared him to me. The gent was kind of distracted, half looking at his Kindle ebook machine and half talking to him. I got out my G-Man monocular and could see the gent was eating a pile of something with an egg on top. Weird. Didn't look Thai at all. And he really didn't look like a mobster. My man broke off to go somewhere and I thought I'd better not tell him. Risky for one thing, and secondly I was interested in who this old gent was and why my man knew him. The gent paid up and jumped onto a tiny scooter which looked more like something a local teenager would ride. He got onto Monavong and turned into Charles de Gaulle. The French embassy up the road had probably seen to it that some of the roads close to it were kind of tributes to their nation. France had failed big time in Indochina like everywhere else, but they liked to be recognized and acknowledged for whatever they had done or thought they had done. Sok Kok is a ramshackle kind of street running parallel to Monavong and is recommended if you want to see the shittier side of Phnom Penh. The whole neighborhood would have been hauled down and rebuilt anywhere in Europe and the USA and probably a lot of Asia nowadays too. It couldn't be called a slum, because what is a slum when half the population is living like that, many of them quite prosperous? It's more a way of life. The gent disappeared up an alley, then took the first turn off from the alley, down a derelict shabby corridor, so narrow you could knock against either side with your shoulders without swaying much. He lived on the first floor and I saw him unlock a rusted iron grill guarding an ancient thick wooden door. What a dump. It smelt of dog shit and cat piss. Why was he living there? And why did this man of mine, this Jimmy if that was his name, know such a person? Never mind. It was something for later. It would probably all hang together in the end. I checked into the Grand Central. In for a penny, in for a pound. I wondered how I was going to explain it all to the boss. I was nearly going to call him and report and ask for advice, but then I thought fuck it. I was getting tired of being a teen apprentice detective. In the field, rapid decisions must be made with or without the authority of superiors. Yes, indeed. I remembered that one too and stored it in my mind to throw back at the boss at every opportunity. I asked for a room on the 12th floor and said I would be bringing my stuff over later. I gave them my cover passport to look at and a crisp $100 bill. Cherry Allingham I was now. I looked so dumb in the passport photo, but that was part of the cover. They thought of everything at the bureau and asked you to look as stupid as possible in the photo room for that particular shot. It comes naturally to some, only some, the guy had said, but quite honestly, and possibly to my credit, it didn't to me. They had to take 3 shots before they were satisfied. I thought of having the brain of George Bush to sort of get into character, but in the end I thought of Keanu Reeves, the dumbest actor alive. It worked. I took the room opposite the elevator doors. Turns out there were not many people on the floor. I still didn't know which room Jimmy was in. I didn't want to bump into him for a while. It looked awful dumb to be that close to him and Jimmy might smell a rat. I telephoned in my latest moves and I could hear the boss gently fuming at the other end. "You have to do what you have to do," he said eventually. It was a bit of a mistake to get that close to him, but what the hell, it happens. Now you have to make the best of it. Watch out, kid. These placid-looking guys can get nasty in the clinch. As if you would know anything about it, the lard-ass pan-pusher. I doubted if Jimmy would ever get nasty. He looked like he didn't have it in him. But just as it was that nice guys abused children, no one ever said they were nasty until we showed them the evidence. It was also nice guys that put a knife in you. I knew that from my training. But there was something about Jimmy I liked and trusted, and yes, I was getting involved. I didn't turn up at breakfast for 3 days. It was painful not to do so. I would slip out when I peered through my door peephole and saw him go down to the mezzanine floor. That was always around 8 o'clock, but he didn't leave the hotel until about 9. I took a seat at the coffee house at the end of Samdok Chakrapong where it joined Brig Trasak Pame. The place was always full of business guys who stayed at the Marriott Tower next door. I guess even they could get too much Marriott. The windows weren't tinted, but I found that at the back of the cafe you were almost invisible from outside. I always paid my check as soon as the coffee came. I could take my time. Jimmy didn't rush through traffic on his bike and neither did I. It was kinda nice telling him, and if he made me, so what? I'd explained that we all had a job to do and he kept pretty bad company. That kind of line. I felt it would work. But you never know. I'd never rubbed up against the mob guys. I'd seen mugshots in surveillance films and listened to lectures. They seemed a pretty grim set of people, always slicing each other up when they weren't slicing up other people. I could be wrong about Jimmy. I was often wrong about people. Surveilling the funeral home was a real grind though. It got on my nerves. There wasn't much business heading there at all most of the time, but slowly it was picking up for an obvious reason. I'd heard about COVID and had started wearing a mask. Nothing could have been more convenient at that point. I not only got to be low profile, I became practically invisible. I could be almost totally Asian in a mask and a hat. Okay. I was over the 155 centimeters or less they all had, but there were taller ones sometimes. And on a bike, who looks tall? You can't tell people's height when they're curled up pedaling. Slowly though, life became rather sad in Phnom Penh when everyone wore a mask, even the traffic cops, even the hookers, even the kids begging for $1. The funeral parlor van got to be a rather busy little vehicle all in all. I couldn't keep up with it and the possible stash locations. Now I'd done some research into the stiff business in Cambodia and discovered that most people got incinerated, cremated, and that unlike the nice urn of ashes in USA, you usually got the skull and hip bones handed to you together with the powder. They just don't have the latest ovens. Or perhaps it was unlucky to crush it all up. I don't know. Most people were then put into a columbarium, and that seemed to happen to Westerners too. The Buddhists aren't too fussy about religious demarcation like the Jews and the Catholics. I guessed that if they weren't shipped home, the Europeans and Americans and Australians were put into a lot in the columbarium, and man, they were huge places. They had little photos of the deceased on them, looking more dead than they were now even, and little vases and gold inscriptions. The remains were put inside the niches with all kinds of keepsakes, replicated sometimes in bright cardboard models. There wasn't all that much room inside the niche, but I figured I was beginning to work out what Jimmy's connection to the mob had become. He wasn't disposing of people as much as disposing of money. That must be it. He wasn't shipping money onto Europe or the US, or to Bangkok or Colombia. He was hoarding it in the funeral home. He was stuffing it into bricked up, plastered over, marble and granite sealed slots in Temple Columbaria all over the city. That had to be it. Unless he was keeping it in his room. He wouldn't be so dumb, surely. But criminals always surprise you at their dumbness. The day I got down to breakfast was a nerve-wracking experience. I'd never been that close to crime before, not this sort of crime anyway, which seemed a lot nicer than dealing with the petty boss. It was a nice little comfortable area, all beige easy chairs and wood paneling and little lamps and help yourself to everything. But there were packaged pats of butter, which I hate, and those portion control packets of cheese, and bread which tasted like it had been sliced the night before. The cereal was okay, also in little boxes like it was precious or something. He noticed me immediately and gave me the eye. I smiled, demurely I think they say. Or is it dimly? He didn't make me feel dim. I could smell a waft of his cologne from where I sat, flashing a lot of my legs because they told you to use all the weapons with men. But he didn't look like a honey trap guy. He had had a lot of girls probably. It was the build of him and the eyes, I think, and the confidence he had about him. Then he came over to me holding a cup of coffee on a saucer and not spilling any of it. "Mind if I join you a while?" he said, and sat down anyway, not too close, and gave me another treat of his cologne, which wasn't overpowering. It was rather sweet, not the jockstrap he-man stuff, something different. "Go ahead." I held my paperback Maryland French close to me in mock defensiveness. I put it on my lap. I mean, how symbolic virgin can you get? He sipped his coffee a while. "How are you finding Phnom Penh?" "It's laid back." "You're right. Different. Or maybe it's just boring," and he giggled a little. I don't like men who giggle much, but he did it all right. "It's a fine line." He let that soak in, and then I remembered that I was working and building trust and trying to get information. "Cherry Allingham," I said, and tendered my hand. He looked for a while as if he was going to kiss it. The Italians do all kinds of weird stuff, but he wasn't all that Italian I could see. "You can call me Jimmy," he replied. I'd already seen his surname on the bills they posted in the little bracket on the wall near your door. "What do you do in Phnom Penh?" I asked, trying to be casual as hell. "Oh, I'm in freight forwarding. All kinds of stuff. Special orders mostly. We ain't a wholesaler. Most everything here seems imported. And at imported prices." "Yes, you got it. They don't make much in the country at all. So the expats and the richer locals are hard-pressed to find a bargain, this or that. Food or clothes or electronics or even medicine. So we try to undercut everyone, and usually it works. Anything you might be needing, little lady?" Well, in point of fact, I needed a lot of things, like pantyhose that fitted and shoes that fitted in real Revlon, not the copy stuff which they sold here and which gave you pimples. "I'll make a list," I said, and laughed a little too. I saw immediately that Jimmy was good up at a merchant. He could lie as naturally as blinking his eyes. I was going to have trouble with him. But he still attracted me. He was daddy all over, sprinkled with success. That was it. There. I'm not ashamed to say it. I'm drawn to older men. Is there anything wacko about that? If there is, I don't give a damn. "Are you looking for a job?" That took me by surprise. I mean, was it a come-on, or did he really mean it? Was I going to be his PA or something and he could come clean about handling stiffs? Or maybe he had a real import-export business on the side. "Depends on the salary," I said, which was pretty good, not too eager, not too much of a put-down. "Well, I may know of something. Bet you can type and think straight. Like a die. Typing is rapid 2 fingers. But accurate mostly. You can talk into the machine these days. It does it all for you. But it don't make a deal or keep a customer. You need hard graft and charm or something to do that. And people gotta trust you." "Oh, I'm very dependable," and I laughed again. "Think you probably are." And he looked into my eyes like he was looking into my deepest recesses. Had he made me? Was he just playing me along? "Drop your resume over. I'll see what I can do." "Jimmy." I remember people saying that you should never let a broad into your life whilst you're in the life. Definitely not when you're doing some sort of job. For one thing, they just drain you of your energy. There's nothing wrong with sex, don't get me wrong. But it oughtn't to be a plumbed-in, always-on home appliance, a modern convenience sort of thing. Not if you want to stay out of the big house. Women just can't be depended on. Ask most of those guys inside, who snitched on them, who really fucked them up and put the handcuffs on them, and 9 times out of 10 it was a broad. The cops know how to break them. Just put the heat on their kids or their mothers. Easy. They come running to sign whatever you put in front of them. And the names and dates and locations just tumble out of their sweet little lips, the ones that said you were theirs forever and they could never let you down. Oh no. So what's old Jimmy doing hitching up with a definite female cop? Oh come on. Don't you think I know what I know? I even have the goods on her, the digital goods that is, because old Jimmy knows about tiny little Bluetooth cameras that you can rig up and post in your doorway so that not even a fly would notice one close-up. As soon as Sammy rolled into town, I knew there would be a posse of feds after us because he's that kind of guy. Any woman, man or beast that rolled up to you and acted all kind of friendly was bound to be a fed. It stood to reason. Not that I don't rate myself, mind you, but when a girl like Sherry, if that's her real name, comes into view and is actually kind to you, there must be some tin brewing. The little cam at the doorway is as big as your pinky nail but keeps going and only turns on when there's something moving. 2 days after I met her in the lobby, who's poking around in my little mailbox outside the door? Sherry. Pretending she's lost. Got the wrong door. She's certainly some kind of trap too. Great legs, great eyes, great lips and great hair. And dare I say she's nicely stacked too. Actually, I didn't care when I thought about it. I ought to have run a mile and told Detroit and Chicago and Florida and New York, or whoever was running the operation, that we were blown. But where would that get me? They'd probably think it was all my fault. Maybe I was trying to shit-slide myself out of the deal. Hadn't I already shown I was a rat anyway? This is how I saw it. With Sammy as bagman, it was only a question of time before the whole operation would be blown, and I didn't fancy the prospect of being shut up with all those stinking assholes because I didn't really have a thing to do with it all. When the shit hit the fan, they were all going down and the only hope I had was making a deal with the feds and walking away from it all, becoming a fugitive they weren't really looking for and not testifying in court because if you do that you're as good as dead. Yay, the deal would be providing the money and the names but being a runaway and never being found. But how was I going to swing it? Did the feds need me? They knew so much already. What they didn't know was 2 important things. One was the name and the evidence on Mr. Big in America, and secondly, where all the money was, because only I knew which little burial plots held what, and it wasn't always in the burial plots anyway. It was in a lot of other places. Come on. All the feds would have to do is find a list of recent burials and go digging for the loot. No way I was going to be that dumb. There are lots of other places you can hide lettuce and powder, believe me. The only other way was to play the broad Cherry along and finally hand over all the dough to Mr. Big and tell them that with Sammy as legs and briefcase, it would never work. That might be a way out. I didn't fancy talking to the feds. They're as smart and as slimy as rattlesnakes, and they would rather stiff you than please you. And even if I got the deal or got into witness protection, living like a schmuck in Montana, the mob would smell a rat and I'd be looking over my shoulder forever. No thanks. If I could choose, I'd sooner try and please my greasy gooey wop shit-faced ginnies in the US than please the feds. If the wops got their dough, they didn't care. Even when they were banged up inside, they only ever thought about the dollars. They ran the operation wherever they were. If they had dough stashed somewhere, they were still in business. doing a deal with you-know-who and the mob generally gave me some kind of security, but that would still leave me as an accomplice to money laundering and looking at 20 years inside. There had to be a way to get myself out of the situation and satisfy everybody, but what could it be? On top of that, I had the very nice Cherry to deal with, and I didn't really want to spend my time misinforming a sweet girl like that. How about doing a deal with her? Would she buy it? It was worth a try. And for God's sake, at the end of it all, when you finally consider everything, she was a looker. She wanted my email, so I gave her a legit one which had no mail in it. I thought I'd better have one just in case anyone asked. Using email to talk to mob people was signing your own arraignment. Even talking on the phone, and you'd better throw the one you used away. Sammy sent me texts first every month, then every fortnight, then every week. The money was coming in fast, and so were the corpses, thank God. So she sent me her resume, which looked very straight up. A modest private school in Connecticut, but she sounded just like me, really. Pure Bronx, but I said nothing. Then she had been to New York University, which they thought would cover her knowledge of things nicely if I ever asked, but I could tell she was no visitor. I doubted if she was even a student ever. Girls who have been to university are always just a little bit prissy, a little bit uptight, if you know what I mean. Cherry was none of that. She was pure FBI, well, as pure as they could make her. No less, for sure. No ballbuster either. A very nice girl considering. I sent her my phone number because I was pretty sure the feds had it already, with Sammy knowing it and all. I told her to give me a call. We met at breakfast every day, but I said I'd like to take her out and get to know her a little. She didn't object. Was she having me on? Of course she was in a way, but as I was playing both sides of the street, maybe she was too. Policemen, like hookers, can get to like their occupation. Crooks like me can't even get to like their cops. It's a funny world. Why think about it? Just remember that it's always your friends that pulled the trigger on you, and you'll be alright. It's a nice place, she said, in that way that women always have when they're in a swanky restaurant. They're all impressed by comfort and thick carpets and wine waiters and soft music and menus which run to a lot of dollars. Chez Gaston was run by an old French renegade gay from way back who'd probably been here when they all really did speak French a little. He sat up there now behind the bar in the little dim red plush-lined restaurant with its gilt this and that and soft, oh so soft lighting, and Edith Piaf records always playing. Gaston wasn't coining it in anymore and looked sad in his ancient, tight black rug gripping his bald pate. It used to be better. They had real French frogs' legs which tasted like chicken. Now I'm not sure if they ain't actually chicken. She giggled and ate them anyway. She didn't look out of place like you might think a cop would, any cop. She was wearing a little black dress and just a small necklace and tiny gold earrings. She could have been a young Jackie Kennedy for me then. For anyone, actually. Wow, they're real tasty whatever they are. So are you, if you don't mind me saying so. I'm not coming on to you because I'm old enough to be your father, I guess, but I don't mind being straight. We could have a job for you at the office, depending on if you can really work for what I really do. Some people would find it upsetting, particularly a nice girl like you. What do you do then? I thought you said it was import-export. Well, it is in a way. We import a lot of urns and bags, and we export a lot of ash. Plus wooden boxes. Sounds spooky. It is, lady. I'm in the bereavement business. You know, a funeral director. Don't ask me how I got into it. I just did, that's all. She put on a surprised look, but I could tell she knew it all. What was the old saying in the movie? Keep your friends close but keep your enemies closer. What could be closer than having her in the office with me? But I wouldn't have to deal with the corpses, I hope. No. You'd be in the office handling the calls. Not the night calls. Dusty does that. Who's Dusty? My partner. Actually, he's my boss. He owns the Mekong Rest Home. English guy. Military. You'll like him. Good as Brits go. She smiled and I could see the wheels whirling in her head. What kind of salary are we looking at? It wouldn't be all that much to start. We never had the secretary so far. Frankly, we never had the trade. But it's picking up right now with the COVID and all. You should get yourself some masks, young lady. I guess she had a dozen Fed issue in her bag. And that was that. She had the creme brulee and I had the chocolate mousse, but I had the feeling she wanted the chocolate mousse. She was careful with the Vasen Romane too. A good girl doesn't get soused and doesn't eat chocolate in public, I guess. She kept in character, or maybe it wasn't a character. Maybe she was a good girl all through. Dusty was awkward about the move. He didn't like having staff as they were expensive, and I guess he was used to the military where women were just not there mostly. He also didn't trust anyone really. He was very much a sole proprietor guy and a hands-on boss, and he didn't like any other hands messing things up. He liked me as I knew how to take orders and not interfere. Being with the mob had taught me that much. Don't ask questions and don't muscle in on other people's turf, he said. She looks great. The photo, I mean. And the CV is just great too. Are you sure you won't be distracted? She's not a girlfriend or something? On my mother's life, she is just a kid who needs a job, and I thought we needed someone. I kinda noticed we're missing calls right now, and people expect to see a girl around. People who drop by inquiring. That kinda stuff. I'm not expecting her to carry a coffin or scrape up the ashes. 1,000 a month tops. And no expense account. You can take her out to dinner and lunch yourself. I guess that's what you want to do anyway. She was hired. Giulia. The boss had me in his stuffy office and didn't look pleased. Frankly, I was on the carpet. I had overstepped parameters and ignored procedures and gone above my level of responsibility. Agent, you may well think this whole operation and it's shaping up to be a big one. What the hell were you doing meeting this guy and taking a job in his company? Who gave you permission to do that? Where does it say in any of the training protocols that you're supposed to be that close to a subject? When men are in that kind of mode, it's best to let them blow it all out of their ass. I sat there for a while, crossed and uncrossed my legs, trying to look agitated but not pulling it off. It just happened that way. I was almost made when he found me in the lobby. He would have known there was something wrong if I'd acted all defensive and just disappeared. He ain't stupid. Far from it. But you didn't have to move into the hotel, and have breakfast, and go out to dinner, and take a job in his office. One thing led to another. If I'd backed out at any stage, he would have smelt a rat. Look, do you want to solve this case, get the goods on these guys, or do you just want us to fool around and get nowhere fast like those surveillance operations? You know, like I do, that to run a good surveillance you need 10 staff round the clock, and what have we got? Me and 2 flat-footed asshole lovers from an NGO who might, just might, spot something in between fumbling in the back seat of their very obvious car. I take it then that you do not figure very high in appreciating and liaising with the aid so generously provided by friendly external agencies. You could say that. Agent, I'm placing you on notice that we at this end do not approve of your cavalier attitude. However, I can also inform you that higher authority in Washington might just save your ass because they indicate in no uncertain terms that you should go ahead. Seems they are losing it too these days. But one thing, don't think I will be here holding your hand when it all comes crashing down around you. I could see it now and why they had sent him to Cambodia of all places. He was a rubber stamp, a cog in the machine, ticking over nicely but watching his backside instead of chasing criminals. he'd be promoted regularly because the deadbeats always were. Noted Captain. And you can cut the sarcasm. I'm just acting captain of station and you damn well know it. My first day at the Mekong rest home was strange, of course, as there was the smell first of all to deal with, the one they taught us to recognize and never get out of our heads quite, as if we could. Then there was the building itself, which was like a mystery house, built by someone who didn't quite know what it was meant to be, a home or an office. It was set right next to a temple and down the road from the big royal hospital. Traffic roared in the distance, but it was fairly quiet inside. I was wearing what a good girl wears for job interviews, a two-piece in navy, and I had the pumps on too, as guys always like that. I was introduced to Dusty and his big shiny bald head and his tattooed arms and his furry chops. He looked nice enough, but of course my eyes were on Jimmy and he kept winking back to me all the time like we're both in on some sort of deal that no one should know about. I suppose we were. The most important thing, Dusty began in his queer British accent, not at all anything I had heard before. The most important thing is to be gentle and polite with all callers, all visitors. They may be the bereaved, they may be shyster lawyers, they may be the police. It doesn't matter. You have to be the same to every one of them. I think she can do that very well, Dusty, Jimmy said. Just look at her. She's as gentle as a lamb. Dusty looked dubious. I would never describe American women like that exactly, he said and laughed a little, but he wasn't being facetious. The procedure was to be on time and take notes and never give out prices, not even estimates, until Jimmy or more likely Dusty had sized up the client. They operated a sliding scale, of course, beginning with basic fees they could eventually park at the embassy of some nation and squabble with the functionaries there. I got to hear some pretty unsympathetic and far from funereal arguments from Dusty's office as he explained that the policy was no money, no burn. No burn, no earn. No earn, no niche in the columbarium. And probably a kick in the shins for good measure. Don't the neighbors get kinda rambunctious about you burning bodies around here? I asked. Dusty was always breezy about such matters. I suppose it came from once being in the military. Well, that's another thing. That's why we're so close to the temple with all those incense ceremonies. And we practically don't have any neighbors. There's the school over the way, but they don't know anything about us much. We send over cakes and iced tea to them all the time, every feast day of whichever priest or school founder or birthday of the royal family alive or dead. And you know, in this country, we're fortunate to have Buddhists around us because death isn't such a big thing to them. They don't go to glory and it isn't rest in peace. It's just a phase. Nothing scary about it at all. You might say we have a good business environment. Jimmy was watching me and I was watching him, but I couldn't leave my desk all the time. I was expected to be in my chair answering landline calls because an institution like ours was expected to have a landline and people usually used it. They didn't want to call us and hear traffic or someone shopping in the supermarket. They expected some piped organ music and a sweet understanding voice, and that meant I would be strapped to my desk for a lot of the time, but I figured out how to transfer calls and I assured Dusty that I would never take a call in a noisy environment. Where was he hiding the loot in the building? Where could it be? I couldn't make out how he did it. Surely it was risky having a bag of $1 million hanging around the building anywhere. He had his own little cubby hole and his own little locker, and it was under lock and key, but all I ever saw go in there was a bottle of wine or whiskey which he never drank but passed out to clients sometimes. I knew I would have to take a peek inside his hotel room, and the local CID knew how to do that all right if you asked them. They just turned up and said they were searching random rooms for traces of something or other, probably cocaine, and the hotel was promised discretion and the best behaved dogs. I thought that was far too heavy-handed. There were other ways. I knew now that Jimmy had rigged up a tiny camera in his doorway because my Bluetooth anti-spy detector had beeped whilst I was scanning the hallway. If he was that smart, he must have another cam inside, even several, and there's only one way to deactivate them, that's to use a signal blocker, similar to the one they use for blocking telephone signals in sensitive places. I prayed that Jimmy's cams were all Bluetooth, then it would work fine. To save on battery life, the little cams were all motion activated so Jimmy wouldn't notice anything during his review of the recording. If I approached his door from the fire escape, he wouldn't notice anything at all. I hoped. Getting inside was easy. With all that CCTV to watch in the hotel every day, I doubt if anyone saw anything. Just to be sure, I wore the kind of cap Jimmy often wore and I had bulked myself out with lots of clothes. We were about the same height fortunately. On the average CCTV cam at the end of the hall, you wouldn't have known it wasn't Jimmy. Key cards are what the FBI knew all about, and getting a clone of Jimmy's was dead easy, even without the original to copy. Nothing easier than breaking and entering for the feds. Jimmy was out on a job and I said I had to go to the dentist. I was in, and what a surprise for a man's room. So neat, so tidy even without the cleaner having been in. I knew the domestics were pretty lax and only came in the afternoon on our floor. I put the Do Not Disturb card on the door handle anyway. They usually ignore it, but who knows? Jimmy didn't have much cash lying around. He had a roll, the mobsters always had a roll, never a wallet, in one drawer, a few thousand, his spending money or his rake off, who knows? If you're not skimming a little in the mob, they distrust you. You must be skimming a lot instead. The big money must be in the safe. All that was a piece of cake too. The little gadget connects and goes through a million computations and hey presto, the number comes up on the little screen and tap 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 tap, it springs open. God bless FBI Electronics Division. There was quite a wad inside the safe. No powder or pills. I guess Jimmy wasn't stupid enough to keep such merchandise in his room. I photographed it all, including a whole pile of treasury bonds. I was just about to conclude my little foray when the door opened. Jimmy stood there looking like he wasn't all that happy. Jimmy. She was some doll, I can tell you. Of course I'd had a few of the local girls, not all that many because they're pretty prim and proper out here where they're just hookers, hobby hookers, part-time hookers, or just putting their hands out for dough because they have no choice. I don't blame them particularly. When your pussy is all you have left to sell, you go for the highest bidder. It definitely wasn't a country for singing, fun girls. It was ring on the finger or hard currency in the palm of their hand. My cherry wasn't a swinger either, although I have noticed a few police broads giving me the eye in the past. They're human like everyone else, believe it or not. If Cherry was just being professional, she was doing a damn good job. You could probably say the same about me. I wondered how I would ever explain having a fed in the office to the people back home. The problem was I actually liked the girl. I felt she liked me. We might be in love. So maybe we were fried. It happens that easily in life. You can be done for before you know it. She was a pretty smooth operator in the office, just what Dusty needed in fact, but I could tell she had her eyes on me all the time. I brought the dough into the office in the bottom of my tote bag, the one I slung to my back when I got onto my bike. It might have been a lunchbox or something. You can get a lot of lettuce into a bag if you try, and a lot of bonds too. The powder I left stowed all over the cemetery. There were so many holes there, you were spoiled for choice. I didn't fancy doing 20 years in a stinking stir in Cambodia. The powder arrived by separate courier, a fucking tiger geek with all the accoutrements of the Asian hoodlum. Gucci shades, tattoos, shiny shoes, white socks, big gold belt buckle, flash car and blonde tints. I hated those little meats, and I got back to home and told them I wasn't in the powder business. So what do? They give me thousands of ketamine and meth tablets instead. Fuck that. It's just as bad a rap as powder. It kept coming in though. I was a holding pen for it all. Reserve stock. I wish they'd just fuck off. Anyway, as I say, she was on me like Flynn on a debutante. Eyes on everywhere, in the toilet, in each corner of my office. She even went through the garbage. I caught her at it. Said she'd lost a ring somewhere. And she never wore rings. The routine was that each urn and columbarium visit or each coffin, they were much rarer, had a little collection of personal items buried with them. I had some nice Chinese-made silk bags just for that purpose and even put the sorry collection of watches, photos, medals and whatnot in the bag beside the loot. I had a little notebook of course to enter all the details and location and that would probably hang me in the end or get me out of a jam with the boys back home. Handing over the little book that is. Dusty noticed nothing. He was first in favor of burning all the memorabilia, he called it, with the corpse, but I said that relatives wouldn't like it and maybe they wanted the niche opened at some point to retrieve a keepsake or heirloom. It had happened already. Someone looking for a carriage clock of all things, but stuff like that had a way of disappearing fast from someone's hotel room or apartment long before we arrived. It's hard explaining to people that we're just burying and burning people, we're not sealing off the stiff's place with no tape, no seals and no watchman. But that of course was what is needed more often than not. People might not rob a blind man, but they sure like to steal from the dead. I knew she had something special cooking because one lunchtime she didn't wait for me and Dusty to go out so she could have a good snoop around. She left the office early, around noon, as she said she had to go to the dentist. It seemed a funny time to see the dentist. They like their long lunch break and siesta like everyone else does in sleepy Phnom Penh. It also seemed a funny time to go out as it's usually baking hot at that time, around 33 centigrade, but it could get up to 35 or 36, which is well in the 90s. She was also too relaxed. Who's relaxed about going to the dentist for fuck's sake? I'd sooner bang my head against the wall. Funny thing about the dentists out here is they all seem to have been trained by the military, and the military was running short of anesthetic at the time. I guess you don't give soldiers Novocaine. You don't give them Nix. Well, that explains why the dentists here poke around with probes and even drills telling you it ain't gonna hurt. It's hard to get one who'll freeze up your gums, I can tell you. I was telling darling Cherry some such and I could see she wasn't that interested. She wasn't all that interested because she wasn't fucking going to no dentist. I smelt a rat as big as a turkey. Damn, she forgot her keys. How's she gonna get back in? We've got a job this afternoon, I said, throwing my own keys in my pocket. I'd better chase after. Do so, said Dusty, who was drawing up a bill, something he liked to do because he saw it as a sort of revenge for what he had to go through. But I could tell he loved his work. Soldiers love dead bodies because they're all not your own. That makes them feel secure, I guess. Happy even. I saw her at the junction of Russian Federation Boulevard and turning into Monavong. She kept going like she might be heading to the hotel. She was heading to the hotel. She turned left and passed the Indian Embassy, then she turned left again, almost hitting a tuk-tuk, but everyone was almost hitting them. I was nicely hidden by a Raptor pickup truck as she turned. She veered right again and she was in the underground car park at the hotel. I waited 5 minutes and parked my bike there too. I must admit I was shaking a little as I went up in the lift. Maybe she was just going up to shower or whatever. Perhaps to clean her teeth. I always turned